do me a favor and turn that around so I can read it? Thanks. Thank you. Now it's going to fall down just because, just because. All right. Thank you. Welcome.
People are still outside. I asked them to come in. There's 3 people signed up for general public comment. We're still signing in. So
I think we need to start, and so I want to start the meeting now. So can I get those 3 people? And we, yeah, and you know, trying to be aware of our time and to start on time. Again, welcome. We're going to start with the reading of the responsibilities of the COAB, and then we're going to read the ground rules, and then we're going to talk about minutes. But I'm going to start with, according to the settlement agreement, the COAB shall independently assess the implementation of the settlement agreement. B, make recommendations to the parties and the COCL on additional actions. C, advise the chief of police and the police commissioner on strategies to improve community relations. D, provide the community with information on the settlement agreement and its implementation. E, contribute to the development and implementation of a Portland Police Bureau Community Engagement and Outreach Plan, the CEO plan, and receive public comment and concerns. Those are the responsibilities of the COAB as per the settlement agreement. And I'd appreciate it, Alicia, if you would read the ground rules.
So these are the guidelines for maintaining common ground. As COAB members, we assume responsibility for the quality of our work together during meetings, discussions, and all other communications. We agree to the following: to abide by these ground rules, critique ideas, not people, work towards shared understanding, speak from personal experience without generalizing, use I statements, speak to all with the utmost respect, avoid crosstalk, listen respectfully when others are speaking, listen actively and attentively, seek to understand, share the air, refrain from monopolizing discussions, and encourage participation by everyone. Challenge ideas in a respectful manner, avoid put-downs, even humorous ones, or other attacks on individuals. Ask for clarification when unsure or confused. Exit meetings in a way that is non-disruptive to the group dynamic. Recognize the legitimacy of people's feelings and support COAB members in expressing their feelings in ways appropriate to the setting. Hold one another accountable to keep agenda times in focus. Hold one another accountable to keep agenda times in focus. Support the chair in managing meetings. Turn cell phones off or to vibrate, and make no calls or texts during meetings except in the case of an emergency. During meetings, use laptops only for meeting business, note-taking, assigned tasks, and we agree to use the parking lot for thoughts and ideas not relevant to the current conversation.
Thank you, Alicia. We don't have minutes for you tonight. The COCL office has been trying to redesign the way that we do minutes and present them back to you. We expect to be able to, at some point in time, use the caption file from the videos to actually create the minutes so that everybody can have them in a timely fashion. Because we're going to use a new system for voting, that is counting votes, and if you look up behind you, it's a little difficult, you'll see that your name is listed. When the votes are called, I'm going to call you by name and ask you to vote by name, and this magic chart up here that Amy has designed will indicate your vote, will indicate who moved on the motion and who seconded the motion, and all of that will be captured in a way that helps us better track recommendations and who voted and when. So that makes it particularly important for you to speak into your microphone so that that can be captured on the tape. I want to make sure that you know that Brad, whose last name right now just went right out of my head, Taylor, is here tonight. And he's the person that you should talk to if you are in need of some help with accommodation, some adjustments to be able to attend the meetings. Please talk to Brad. Thank you, Brad. Mandy, you had some things you wanted to say. Do you? Yeah. Okay. Okay, well, you know the restrooms are out and down the hall.
Pretty much, yes. That was more or less the only other thing I was going to say. And also, should there be an emergency, there are 3 main exits to this building. You all probably walked into at least one of them, but one right there, one on the other side, one straight down the hallway where the restrooms are. And we talked about Brad, and I would also like to introduce our ASL interpreters who are here to interpret for all of us tonight. Tara and Jenna are sitting up front, and they're here with us most months, and I just wanted to take this time to let you all know who they were and to thank them for their hard work. I think that's it.
Thank you. And I want to take the time to acknowledge Dennis Rosenbaum, who's here from Chicago. He's our COCO person. And hi, Dennis. Welcome. We're going to have a short public comment session now, but this is a really packed agenda with a lot of recommendations to be reviewed. Tonight, it's going to be set up so that there will be public comment after the recommendation is made and before a vote is taken, so that any public comment can be incorporated into the thinking as the COAB discusses the issues. Is that clear? Okay. So the first set of comments is sort of out and whatever the public wants to say. Tonight, instead of your usual 3 minutes, because we have a packed agenda, you will be limited to 2 minutes. Okay? So the person I have on this list is Kalei Lubin.
The first thing that I'd like to do is to thank you all for your service and to tell you that insofar as I've been able to get to know you, I like and enjoy each one of you, even though I recognize that each one of you comes from a different place from where I come from and from where each other comes from. The city has asked for diversity, and luckily we got it. And you're the diversity. You're us. You're Portland. I would wish that each one of you could love each other as much as I love you, but that seems not to be possible. If we can't love one another, then maybe we can try to respect one another. And if we can't respect one another, maybe we can be polite to one another. But one of the things that I know is that courtesy and respect precede kindness. And if we are not courteous, then probably we won't be kind. And right now, this city needs kindness more than anything else. I'd like to welcome Chicago here because I'm watching y'all in Chicago, because that's our destiny. If we can't solve our problems in this room, in this way, equally, strongly, happily, cheerfully, gladly, then we might all meet in the street somewhere. Not so happy, not so proud. What I wanted to say is that Judge Simon was promised something, and I found this document. The promise was made in June of 2015. It says 4 entities are responsible for generating information about the implementation of the settlement agreement. So it lists the city, it lists the COCO. Third is the Community Oversight Advisory Board must provide the COCO with community input. That's me, I'm community. And independently assess implementation of the agreement. As I read this, you are as important as anybody else here. I want you to know that that's what I believe in my heart, that you will do the job that you were asked to do, represent the community with integrity and with honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Handelman.
Good evening. I'm Dan Handelman with Portland Cop Watch. I typed up my comments tonight, but I'm going to hand them out to you at the end of my 2 minutes because the top half is comments on the specific proposals from tonight. So this is kind of comments from Portland Cop Watch. Officer Meyer's complaints against 3 volunteer community members of this board were written on official police bureau letterhead. Because of Officer Meyer's complaint that his advisory statements were not printed verbatim in the recommendations, the board now seems frightened to make clerical corrections such as the typo that said "reasonable" instead of "reasonable" that we pointed out to several COAB members. We're surprised to learn that our response to the DOJ's memo contained an inaccuracy because the Mental Health Subcommittee, according to the website, does have 8 COAB members on it, and this subcommittee should either be treated specially as a public body or one member should be asked to join a different subcommittee. The subcommittee section of the bylaws reads, subcommittees may include non-voting COAB members previously designated as alternates and members of the public, but it does not state that police advisory members get a vote. The purpose of the COAB as stated by the DOJ in the recent memo was out of context, and they probably deliberately removed words directly preceding the quote about promoting community confidence in the Bureau, which says, to provide for independent oversight of the agreement. There is still a lot of confusion among the COAB members, the public, the DOJ, and the city about Oregon's public meetings laws and how they apply to this board. A neutral expert, perhaps from the Oregon Department of Justice, should make a clear presentation with a flow chart using plain language describing the law. The chair has to stop allowing the police to run out the clock on meetings and let the COAB's subcommittees make monthly reports. COAB voted to hold meetings twice a month, but only one meeting is listed in December and January and none beyond that. And finally, this has less drama because I'm coming back up to talk to you later, but given the suppression of the community's voices that's coming from the DOJ, the COCL, and the city, our inclination would be to join the dozens of people who came to early COAB meetings and stopped attending. But we don't feel the COAB should be able to work unobserved, so we'll continue to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Nancy Newell.
Hi, everyone. I'm a community member for about 24 years, and I'm really disappointed in the DOJ statement. I think it is actually ludicrous in the eyes of real law, and it's not uncharacteristic. I mean, the JTTF was recently brought in by the promotion of the DOJ, and some people say, well, that's Oregon DOJ is separate from the national. That's not the case. If you're involved with the DOJ on surveilling whether we have terrorists in our community, and then you say that we are doing processes that are not legal, or you are surveilling every single one of us that has contacted Black Lives Matter, which is a critical part of the settlement process to build trust so we don't have racial problems that are also addressed in the settlement issue. So what in the world are we doing here? Do you understand what I'm saying? You cannot surveil people and then build trust. And be honest about it. The ACLU exposed it. We want to know what's going on with our government and how we can't even act as individual citizens to carry out our rights. And these are our rights. And you can't suppress us. You're not going to stop us. We're going to keep going. Because if it has to get to that kind of atmosphere, we'd rather avoid it. And that's why we're here. So I really wish the DOJ, and I totally support Dan's efforts in all the recommendations that he's making. I haven't had time to research some of it, so I'll be adding. I hope I can still get it into the record. But I think there's a lot of good things that can come out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, let's start with the, again, we have a very full agenda, and I expect this to move pretty quickly. That includes being able to have testimony from people on specific recommendations. And yes. In the room? Yes. Jared and Jonas are in the room. The Department of Justice representatives are here with us tonight. Thank you. Looks like we don't have very many signatures here for people who want to comment on the recommendations. What I will do then is allow, as you hear, people to come up and make those comments, but I will limit the number of people because of the number of recommendations and the time that it will take. So expect me to say your time is up, all right? We're going to start with a correction. Excuse me. Oh, so I'm going to call, I said earlier, I'm going to call your names and you're going to vote. And we're going to put that up on the chart there. The first recommendation is being brought back because the mental health crisis response team, in reference to the Directive 1500 on training, we heard this recommendation, but it never really got voted on. So we're bringing it back to the COAB to be considered and voted on. The recommendation is that training include a cultural responsiveness to the houseless community, those impacted by mental illness, and other marginalized communities. So is anyone from that committee of the co-chairs want to speak to this recommendation? Okay, and Sharon's not here, okay. Any public comment on this recommendation? That is the recommendation that training include a cultural responsiveness to the houseless community, those impacted by mental illness, and other marginalized communities. No public comment. Come up to the microphone, please. We need you at the microphone so we can catch it on the tape, please.
So don't we just need cultural training as opposed to specific training towards all three of those things? Because I think just a cultural training session will cover all of those things. Is this being introduced as a recommendation into the training for the DOJ settlement?
This is a part of a recommendation to the training of Portland police officers.
Right.
And that this should include these elements. So it's being very specific. And your question is?
My comment is I'm not sure that I don't think, in my opinion, that we need to train towards those specific things. I just think cultural training that will allow the officers to go out and just involve themselves in the neighborhood, in their communities, on an everyday basis is enough cultural training.
I think this is more specific. Would you like to address that, Alicia?
Yes, I appreciate your comments. I guess what we were working to do is to be as explicit as possible. I think when you say things like cultural training, that's vague. And each of these specific entities, they're subcultures, right? Houselessness, mental illness, and other marginalized groups. And I think we just wanted to be very specific. And I'm not sure that just saying cultural training would cover that. We just want to be explicit.
So what I'm saying is that these things change. So one day is homelessness, another day is, mental illness,
I hear you.
And another, so if we just get a blanket cultural training system going, that will encompass.
Right, but what I want to remind you of is what brought us here to the table in the first place. And we talked about this a little bit. It's making sure that we realign ourselves to the mission. And the mission here is to make sure that we are helping police, the Portland Police Bureau, become a little more culturally responsive when it comes to persons who are in perceived mental health crisis or have mental illness. That's what drew us to this table.
Right.
So we can add a number of different things, but again, if we're trying to sort of be laser beam focused on that one particular thing, recognizing that there is fluidity and things change,
Right.
we do need to be explicit and to, again, align ourselves around that mission.
So I appreciate that, and I guess then I want to just add that if we're gonna specify the types of training, then we have to start hiring people with certain skills that are coming to the table already with these types of training, so training won't take so long.
Ditto. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions?
I move to vote on this recommendation.
So are you making a motion
Yes.
Yes, okay. Is there a Philip Wolf is making the motion. Who is the second? Abel Gordley is the second. I'm going to call your name, and you'll say yes, no, or abstain, please. Siadam Edmo?
Yes. I thought we had discussion before the vote. Is there no more discussion and then we go ahead and vote?
Well, you've been discussing it.
Oh,
Did you have
okay.
more that you wanted to?
I wanted to give the opportunity for it, because after the community made their comments, then I just wanted to make sure.
Do you want, is there something more that you wanted to say, Philip?
Nope,
Okay.
that was it.
Okay. Siadam? Yes. Bud Pulis?
Yes.
Yes. God. Catherine Gardner?
Yes.
Abel Gordley?
Yes.
Who is Johnson? Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Ime Curley?
Yes.
Mariah Medina? Maria? She's not here. Sharon Marion? Alicia Moreland Capua?
Yes.
V. Riviere? Aye. Rochelle Silver?
Yes.
Tom Steenson?
Yes.
Philip Wolf?
Yes.
The motion passes, and you notice the little box up there turns green and says pass. Thank you. We are now going to move on to look at the recommendations from the Data Systems Use of Force and Compliance Subcommittee. And we're looking at Directive 1010, Use of Force. The first one is a recommendation for a comprehensive examination and rewrite of Portland Police Bureau's Directive 1010, Use of Force. Directive 1010, Use of Force, should be comprehensively examined and rewritten where needed to ensure that all of the recommendations from the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee are embodied in the directive. See the packet for further explanation. The chair is Tom Steenson. Do you want to speak to this recommendation, Tom?
I want to speak generally to all the recommendations to put them in context. May I?
When you say all of them,
I have some remarks that I think will be helpful to the process.
go ahead.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the Data Systems Use of Force Subcommittee and the Use of Force Work Group for the tremendous amount of time and effort that they spent in developing and approving the recommendations to revise the Portland Police Bureau's use of force policies, which are before the full COAB tonight for consideration. I also want to thank the community members who attended our meetings and made valuable contributions to these recommendations. To put the importance of these recommendations in context, we only need to remember that we are here because the Department of Justice found, quote, the PPB engages in a pattern or practice of unnecessary or unreasonable force during interactions with people who have or are perceived to have mental illness. And second, they found there is a, quote, need for revised policies, quote. The importance of these recommendations is further highlighted by recent, rather startling evaluations of the Portland Police Bureau's use of force policies and related training. In March of this year, the independent auditor for the city of Portland audited the PPB's training division. As found in the 2014 in-service defensive tactics training class that they observed, none of the 12 participants, Portland police officers, could correctly articulate the Bureau policy on when to use force when they were asked by the instructor. In a subsequent conversation with another instructor, we were told that only one person in any of the prior classes correctly answered the question.
Tom, excuse me. How much time do you want for this part, please?
As I told you earlier today, probably about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I want to keep it focused on the recommendations that we're considering tonight. And that's why I'm asking.
I believe that the context of the recommendations are important for an appreciation of what we're trying to do. If you want me to stop, then you
No,
make
I
that
haven't asked
decision.
you to stop. I've asked you to keep it focused, please. Thank you.
I think it's very focused, thank you. Likewise, the most recent survey of Portland police officers recently conducted by the COCO revealed that nearly half of the officers who responded, or 47%, said they, quote, felt that the Bureau's current use of force policy was difficult to understand. Pointing out what may be the obvious, the COCO said, I'll paraphrase, if they don't understand the policy, how can you expect that the policy will be consistently followed? With all this in mind, our work was not to review every single word or even every single sentence of the Portland Police Bureau's current use of force policies, which as a whole we found to be very poorly written and lacking in clarity. What we felt was most important was to focus on the most critical revisions which were needed in order to reduce the use of force as much as possible, both in terms of how often force is used and the severity of the force that is used. To develop the recommendations before us tonight, we examined use of force policies from several different police departments to find what we believe to be best practices. Ultimately, we relied heavily on the use of force policies recently enacted in the last year or two by the Seattle Police Department and the New Orleans Police Department, and approved by the DOJ pursuant to settlements reached with those two cities over similar patterns or practices of the use of unnecessary or unreasonable force. We also relied upon recommendations regarding the use of force which various expert consultants hired by the City of Portland have made over the past 10 or 15 years and which have not been fully implemented by the Portland Police Bureau. Those consultants who've reported the city numerous times are the Police Assessment Resource Center and the OIRG group. One of our guiding principles was to make recommendations which reduce the need for using force. In that regard, we have made recommendations regarding a strong mission statement that respects the value of all human life and core principles to further that mission. We also have made recommendations which will further the use of de-escalation and disengagement techniques to avoid or reduce the use of force. We also have made recommendations which provide much clearer guidance to officers as to when it would be reasonable to use force and what level of force would be reasonable. Ultimately, what we did was combine portions of what we determined were best practices in the Seattle and New Orleans policies, along with best practices evidenced by the recommendations to the city from those two independent consultants they've hired over the past 10 or 15 years. In doing this, we did not feel constrained by differences in policies in Seattle versus New Orleans. What we tried to do was determine what would be best for Portland and our community that so strongly supports change in the Portland Police Bureau's use of force policies. In sum, as chair of the subcommittee, I believe the recommendations are a product of careful research after taking into consideration best practices and represent a major step, if enacted, in the direction of substantially improving the use of force policies which should govern the Portland Police Bureau. Finally, the policy revisions which we are recommending, if enacted, will much better inform the community about what it can expect from Portland police officers when they encounter citizens in situations when the use of force may be an option, and that should increase, hopefully, the level of trust that the community has that its police officers are following the letter of the law. Thank you. The first recommendation takes into account that we found the main use of force policy, the sort of the trunk policy, you might call it, 1010, to be kind of a mess. It's poorly written, it's poorly organized, and it's unclear. And so we are recommending that it be revised, it be comprehensive, it be consistent, it have good definitions, standard kinds of things that you ought to have if you want a policy that's going to be clear and effective and communicate what needs to be communicated to officers so that when they're on the street, they know what force they should be using and not using.
Thank you, Tom. So again, the recommendation is the Directive 1010, use of force, should be comprehensively examined and rewritten where needed to ensure that all of the recommendations from the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee are embodied in the directive. Is there any more discussion by the COAB, members of the COAB? Ava?
Thank you. I would just like to appreciate Tom Stinson for opening by providing a context for all of the recommendations. The context, I believe, is helpful to members of the public who are not in the room and who may be watching the replay of this meeting or listening to the audio. I think what he did was, again, provide a context and a framework for looking at all of the recommendations, starting with 1010.
Thank you. Other, Seattle?
I just have a specific friendly amendment to the packet of information that was submitted along with this recommendation, which I think speaks to the committee's intent to centralize the respect and value and sanctity of human life, and that is to move, and these are on page 5 and 6, so to move number 3 to be number 1, which is the, when we talk about the policy section, it is the acknowledgement that PPD respects the value and sanctity of human life. It's in the bigger packet. And then and then switch number 5 to be number 2, recognizing that the use of deadly physical force will emotionally, physically, and psychologically impact the member involved. Those would be my 2 friendly amendments. Other than that, I support this recommendation.
Do you want to talk about the amendments?
I'm not exactly clear what you're referring to, because I don't see the particulars that you're referring to be part of the first recommendation. So I may be missing something, but I understand. But
They're in the background materials related to recommendations 10/22/15/1 through 111/215/10. It's in the big packet. Oh boy. I apologize if I'm not speaking to exactly what we're talking about. Okay.
I'm trying to get,
Okay, it's in the big packet. Yeah. All right, page 5 and 6.
let me just, maybe I should back up a moment. We did not write or rewrite 1010 in its entirety. That was not what we intended to do, and we did not do that. What we did was look for a mission statement, we looked for core principles, we looked for prohibitions against force, we looked for particular items that needed to be included. That's not to say that there aren't provisions within 1010 that are good. And we did not mean to wordsmith or to approve or disapprove everything in the existing directive. Having said that, I don't have any problem with your proposed amendments, but we're not meaning by these directives to necessarily say something needs to be excluded from the existing policy unless it's contrary to what we're recommending. And ultimately, it's not our decision anyway. The DOJ, in consultation with the Portland Police Bureau, will decide what the policy is going to be. We're just making recommendations, and we're trying to highlight the most important things that we found that need to be included. But I don't find those amendments to be anything but friendly, and that's fine.
I'm trying to understand what exactly is being incorporated or changed. because I don't have all of that background documentation here. I
think there might be some confusion. So the recommendations are all in one packet, and the background material is all in another packet, and the recommendations are what the changes are. So the background material is actually what exists. So I'm not sure that you actually made a friendly amendment. I think you actually made a recommendation for an additional change, which I fully support, but I'm not sure we can actually do that here. I would need some guidance on that.
Yeah. Adam, could you tell me, please, are you trying to highlight something in making that change? Are you trying to emphasize something in making that change?
Yes, and it was, I thought it was a reflection of the subcommittee's emphasis on the value of human life.
Okay. So you are suggesting that that value be up front in the overall statement about the need for changes in the writing of the directive.
Yes.
Right. So as I understand it, and help me if I'm wrong, the recommendation is that, or the friendly amendment is to the recommendation for rewriting the directive. And that friendly amendment is to incorporate into that rewrite an emphasis on the value of human life. Okay. So that means we vote on the amendment first, if in fact you will accept that friendly amendment, Tom.
Friendly, sure.
Okay. Okay. So now back to the recommendation itself. Is there any public comment on this recommendation? Yes.
Just very briefly, Paul Fishman, Southeast Portland. A quick question and then a comment. Does the settlement agreement require the use of force directive to be rewritten? Tom, do you know, or?
No.
It requires it to be reviewed.
Reviewed, okay.
Yes.
So I would, just looking at the first paragraph here, inside the box, I think there are really two recommendations here. The first recommendation, and my suggestion would be, the first recommendation is that the use of force directive should be rewritten, period. The second part of that, my understanding is that COAB is, your role is advisory and to recommend. And so by saying that, ensuring that all the recommendations from the subcommittee are embodied is kind of setting up an all or nothing. Mm-hmm. So maybe recommending that all of the recommendations are thoroughly and seriously reviewed and considered in the rewrite of the directive. And maybe go further and say an explanation of where those are not used, an explanation by the Bureau of why they were not implemented, or something like that. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. More discussion from the COAB? Did you understand what was said was that there are two recommendations here, the second being perhaps premature or not stated as an advisory, not stated as an advisory recommendation. Okay. Any more discussion? Opinions? Okay. Do I have, yes, Tom?
I'm reluctant to incorporate that recommendation. What I will say is that two things. Anything that you believe or recommend, whether it gets adopted by the COAB, will certainly be part of the record, and the DOJ and the Portland Police Bureau can consider it. And secondly, what I didn't mention was this is like the first go-around on these use of force directives. I suspect the COAB is going to revisit these in 6 months or a year as we look at training and look at other aspects of how the Police Bureau is operating. So this is not a last chance for us to weigh in on this. And I'm not trying to suggest you don't have a good idea, but I think right now, the recommendation as it stands probably makes sense in the context of the other recommendations.
All right. The recommendation, as I understand it at this point, with the friendly amendment, comprehensive examination and rewrite of Police Bureau's Directive 1010, use of force. Use of force should be comprehensively examined and rewritten where needed to ensure that all of the recommendations from the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee are embodied in the directive with an emphasis on the value of human life. Are you ready for the question? Can I get a motion? I'm sorry.
Rochelle
Get a
would
motion.
like to say something. Rochelle would like to say
Rochelle?
I was just going to make a motion.
Couldn't hear you.
I was just going to make a motion.
Okay. Do I have a motion from Rochelle?
I motion that we adopt recommendation number 1 with the friendly amendment.
Second was Alicia. I will. Yes, Tom?
And for clarification, the way this recommendation form was put together by the COCO, in the box, when you look at the form, in the box on the front page, the entire contents is part of the recommendation, and Kathleen has read a portion of that, but just so everyone's clear, it's the entire, it's all the text in the box that forms this
Okay, I
recommendation.
can read the whole text.
I don't think you need to, but I just want
I
to
think
make
I should, for the record, if that's the recommendation, because if there are pieces that need to be discussed.
Well, that's how you set the form up, and that's what we did, so.
Yes. The revised directive, unlike the current version, should be entirely self-contained with no external references to other directives, guidelines, or manual describing policies, principles, guidelines, training, or standard operating procedures. It should be stated explicitly that the entirety of revised Directive 1010 is a policy statement in keeping with the formatting and organization of the DOJ-approved Seattle Police Department use of force policies. The revised directive also needs to have a set of clear and comprehensive definitions. While the subcommittee believes that the entire directive needs review, the more specific recommendations, numbers 2 and 8, are focused on the parts found to be most in need of revision, and those come later, the 2 through 8, okay? So, now you hear the revised, and include in that the value of human life. That rewrite. I have a motion on the floor, and it's been seconded, and I'm going to call the roll for voting. Siadam Edmo.
Yes.
Bud Pulis.
Yes.
Catherine Gardner.
Yes.
Abel Gordley.
Yes.
Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
Amy Curley.
Yes.
Maria Medina. Sharon Marion. Alicia Moreland Capua.
Yeah.
Viana Revere. Silver.
Yes.
Steenson.
Yes?
And Wolf.
Yes.
The recommendation passes. We'll move to the next one, which I will read in its entirety as we go into it. This is the one on core principles, I do believe. There should be a set of the recommendation reads as follows. There should be a set of core principles for when the use of force is authorized, and these principles should be explicitly laid out at the beginning of revised Directive 1010 use of force. The set of core principles should begin with a strong mission statement that expands upon the one in current Directive 1010. The proposed text for incorporation into the revised directive is set forth below. The set of core principles should include at least the following: A comprehensive statement which emphasizes the primacy of de-escalation as a tool to avoid or reduce the need for force. B, a comprehensive statement that only a level of force which is objectively reasonable, necessary under the facts and circumstances, and proportionate to the threat or resistance of a subject is authorized. The proposed text for incorporation in the revised directive is set forth below. And C, objectively unreasonable, unnecessary, and/or disproportionate use of force and/or other violations of the directive shall result in corrective action and/or discipline up to and including termination. Tom, would you mind reading the proposed text that you refer to both in the second paragraph and the, I think, fourth or fifth?
Yes, it's on the second page in terms of the mission statement. The mission statement needs to be the first core principle in the PPB's use of force policy. It needs to be an expanded statement, not just, quote, we respect the dignity, quote, as is in the current Directive 1010. See policy section number 3. At the very least, the mission statement should provide the following. It is the policy of the PPB to accomplish the police mission with minimal reliance upon the use of force. The community expects and the PPB requires that officers use only the force necessary to perform their duties, and that such force be proportional to the threat or resistance of the subject under the facts and circumstances. The policy of the PPB and an officer's commitment to public safety includes the welfare of members of the public, the officer and fellow officers, with an emphasis on respect, professionalism, and protection of human life and the dignity of all people, even when force is necessary. Officers of the PPB shall use the minimum amount of force that the objectively reasonable officer would use in light of the facts and circumstances to effectively bring an incident or person under control while protecting the lives of the member or others. Members are advised that the PPB places restrictions on an officer's use of force that go beyond the restrictions set forth under the Constitution or state law. In addition, the mission statement needs to include statements about the treatment of the mentally ill and other special populations. The policy should not refer to them as impaired individuals, nor should it use the term emotionally disturbed. The other portion that's referred to starts on page 4. It's titled Objectively Reasonable, Necessary, and Proportional Force. Only force which is objectively reasonable, necessary in the totality of the facts and circumstances, and proportional to the threat or resistance of a subject should be authorized. Current Directive 1010 does not clearly require force to be necessary under the facts and circumstances or to be proportional to the threat or resistance of a subject. And then it refers to the best practices in the DOJ-approved Seattle Police Department use of force policy regarding this core principle should be incorporated in their entirety in revised Directive 1010. And there's a reference to the site for that policy from the Seattle Police Department.
Okay. COAB discussion? Questions? Public comment on this recommendation, the core principles? Philip? Did you have your?
I was going to move that we vote on this recommendation.
So you make a motion to accept?
Yes.
Okay. Can I get a second from Bud? Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. I have a motion from Philip and a second from Bud, and now I'm going to call the roll. Sealam?
Yes.
Bud?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes.
Abel?
Yes.
Jimmy?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Maria, she's still not here. Sharon? Alicia? Yes. V? Aye. Rochelle? Yes. Tom?
Yes.
Philip?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Okay, the next recommendation is regarding determining the reasonableness of force. There should be specific criteria for determining the reasonableness of force, reasonableness of both the initiation and the continuation of the use of force in any encounter. At a minimum, the criteria should include: A, officers will take into account all information when feasible, including behavior, reports, and known history as conveyed to or learned by the officer by any means, indicating that a person has or is perceived to have mental illness. B, a broad list of facts and circumstances which must be considered in determining the reasonableness of force. C, a use of force continuum that emphasizes the requirement that only necessary and proportionate force be used. D, a requirement that there be a continuing assessment of the encounter such that changing facts and circumstances be explicitly taken into account in determining what is objectively reasonable, necessary, and proportionate force at any point in time. And E, since an officer's own actions may cause a need for force, officers should take reasonable care of that their actions, whether consistent with policy and training or not, do not precipitate an unnecessary, unreasonable, or disproportionate use of force by placing themselves or others in jeopardy. Discussion? Questions? You want to speak to the, yes, Bud?
So I have a question, and this may actually go to the Department of Justice representatives in the room. I've gotten the impression that, we've got a lot of debate about the use of force continuum. And so my question for either COCL or Department of Justice is, if one of you were to find that that particular item was objectionable, would you still be able to pursue the remainder of the recommendation, or would that invalidate the entire recommendation?
Okay.
Thank you, Bud, for that question. Madam Chairwoman, may I answer? Each insular part of the recommendations we will consider. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jonas. More questions, discussion?
So I just want to talk a little bit about the force continuum, because there is some concern on our part. In 2008, we went away from kind of how this is referred to, a force continuum. We had levels of control. And in 2008, we had 677 uses of force. And since then, we have dropped 56%. 2014, we had 742 uses of force since we've gone away from it. So I have real concern when we're talking about bringing that back. Not to mention our reporting requirements now are higher than they were in 2008, meaning, let me give the example of, say, a high-risk traffic stop where you have 2 or 3 officers that point a firearm at a vehicle. Maybe they were involved in an armed robbery or something. In 2008, only one, the primary officer had to report a use of force. So only one reporting of a pointing of a firearm came out at that time. In 2014, all 3 officers had to fill out a use of force report. So we've changed our reporting requirements, and yet they've still significantly dropped 56%. So I have real concern when we're wanting to go backwards with some of that. So the reasonableness, yes, is definitely a high standard, and we're working and getting better and better and better at it. And if you look at our numbers, every year they've decreased. So I just want you to take that into consideration.
Could somebody say in in plain language, what a use of force continuum is?
Yes.
Well, okay. Let's go with Tom and then come back to you, Tasha.
I would have addressed the issue, but I didn't know whether anyone was going to speak in opposition to it. A use of force continuum is a guide in combination with the reasonableness, the necessary element, and the proportionate element by which officers can be given guidance on what levels of force should appropriately be used depending upon the level of resistance. So it works like this. You start with, typically in a use of force continuum, the one that we looked at was the one that was adopted in New Orleans and approved by the Department of Justice. It starts with passive resistance. Someone is essentially doing nothing except maybe refusing to move or arguing, but there's no actual resistance. And only certain force can be used in response to that, and the way continuums work, really, you can't use any force except to physically maybe move someone out of the street. Then you move to active resistance, which is something else, and typically you can't use much force in response to active resistance because it only involves maybe trying to hide, maybe pulling away from an officer's grasp. In other words, there's no actual assault of the officer, there's no intent to hurt someone, and so the amount of force that can be used there is very limited, usually just to get control. When you move to active, the next level, called aggressive resistance, you have someone who's physically being assaultive at some level or threatening at some level. And that's when, under the continuum, officers can move into using tasers, beanbag shotguns, other levels of physical force. And then the last level is what the continuum in New Orleans is called aggressive resistance. Then you have someone who's threatening the use of force or actually engaged in the use of force that could cause death or serious physical injury. And that then elevates the level of force that's permissible at the outside for the officer to use, being deadly force or something of that nature. It can include up to pulling and using a firearm if either the officer or someone is being threatened with that level of force. So the idea is that overall, under the policy we're proposing, the force has to be reasonable, necessary, and proportionate. But the use of force continuum gives officers guidance as to what really the policy means in terms of resistance versus the level of force. And part of the reason that the subcommittee thinks this is important, and I recognize what Michelle says about the statistics, is that when officers don't understand the policy, and that I talked about earlier in my opening remarks, then there needs to be specific guidance. And it may be ultimately that the DOJ or the Portland Police Bureau refuses to implement that, but the subcommittee thinks that that would be an important step, and it is something that's employed throughout the country, not in every jurisdiction, not every police department. Okay. But it is an accepted practice. We think it's the practice that ought to be part of this policy for Portland.
Thank you, Tom. Tasha.
Just a quick background for the people in the room. I spent 3 years in the training division, and those 3 years were when we moved away from the use of the force continuum into the reasonableness that is outlined in Graham versus Connor. So I'm going to give a quick example of why a force continuum is dangerous to have by telling you what it allows. So if a person throws a punch at a police officer, the force continuum says that cop can punch you back. But the Graham standard says that punch has to be reasonable. So if the person who's throwing a punch at you is a 72-year-old guy walking down the street with a cane and his punch is feeble and not going to make any contact, it is not reasonable for you as a 25-year-old young male police officer to punch back. That's an extreme, but you can put a whole bunch of different parameters in there as to what is reasonable. Maybe it's 2 police officers and only 1 person and the punch isn't reasonable. So you can't have a bright line, and that's what the force continuum was for us, is a bright line. It says, if the person does this, you can do this back, and the reasonableness doesn't really have a role in it. And the reality is Graham versus Connor is very direct about how police officers can use force. That force has to be reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. You have to take that into account. Michelle is right, in going to a force continuum takes us backward, and in my mind is specifically at this point very dangerous, because it makes it too easy. Right now, we've made it it's a challenge. Police officers have to think about a lot before they deploy force. That's how we've made it for them. We've trained them that way. We've spent a lot of time, and we've moved a huge distance from where we were when we had this. So I would ask for caution in including this in any recommendation. And of course, as it's been said, a recommendation can be made and the police bureau wouldn't follow it. And I think part of our role is to tell you when those things are coming up that are really going to be a sticking point, and this is going to be one of them in this recommendation.
Thank you. Sharon?
Thank you. And I apologize for coming in late to this conversation. And so I missed some of the earlier discussion. But for a point of clarification, isn't it true that if something needs to be objectively reasonable given the totality of the circumstances, it would just by necessity include what's objectively reasonable given the totality of the circumstances? So you could take, say, the feeble 72-year-old who's trying to punch an officer, and that would fit within that. You could take whatever situation it is, it would be a reasonable, whether it's officer or whomever in that situation, would feel that the force was proportionate, necessary, and reasonable. I'm not sure. I feel that this might be an issue more for the training portion, not the policy itself. I don't think. I think it's it has the potential to be dangerous if you're trying to outline every single thing that could come within a spectrum, because you just can't anticipate that. But as long as you're doing what is appropriate and reasonable given the totality of the circumstances, then you can train the officers what is considered appropriate and train to that, and that we as a COAB should be looking and reviewing that. Just
Okay. I have V, Amy, Tom, and Jakari, and then Paul, and then Siadam.
So am I clear to speak, Chair?
Yes.
Madam Chair? I've noticed that there's a line output difference between Hager and when Marion spoke, and I don't know if that goes to the text, the audio text, but it would be, one moment. It would be nice if we could get them to equalize, because I can barely hear when Michelle speaks.
Yeah, and do you mind speaking in the mic?
Oh.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if the text can do something about the line output, because I'm having difficulty hearing when Sergeant Hughes speaks and when Chair Steenson speaks, and earlier when Siadam spoke, yet I can hear Lieutenant Hager and Marion fine. So I would like to be able to hear everything that's going on. Thank you.
Amy?
It's Ime, just so
Ime.
you know.
I'm sorry.
But I guess my concern here is, and I don't know if this is a friendly amendment or not, Tom. So my concern is that there are 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 5 things in this recommendation, And if we ultimately disagree about the use of force continuum, which is under C, and we vote on all of these, then our vote is either going to have to be to abstain or to vote no, even if we agree with everything else. And so I'm wondering if it's possible to vote on these separately or vote on them in a way that groups them so that we can have an opinion on the use of force continuum part and also on the reasonableness, which is your overall point here. Because I would hate to have to vote no on something that I actually agree with. Is it possible to group these in a different way or separate them out and vote for each letter?
Tom, you want to speak to that?
I don't have any problem with that. I want to address the issue, but if the COAB wants to move and separate out the use of force continuum, I think that's fine with the subcommittee.
Okay. We'll come back to that in a minute. Let's hear from the people who are still on the list. I have Jakari, Paul, and Siadam.
Is that a question for Paul? Now, our use of force policy that stands right now is 9 pages. So when Mr. Steenson talked about officers not being able to cite our use of force policy, well, it's massive now with the oversight and the amount of work that people have put into it. To memorize that and be able to say that verbatim, I can't memorize 9 pages, but I do know that under the totality of the circumstances and the reasonableness on individual incidents that officers come into contact with, that's pretty simple. It's basically saying, what's the right thing in this situation? What's the governmental interest in this? Is this person just intoxicated and needs to get moved along? Fine, let's get 3 officers here before we even contact them, and let's try a de-escalation right off the bat, whether he has friends with them. All these things we try to explore, because at the end of the day, some cowboy gun-ho officer jumps out and grabs this guy and wrestles with him. Well, he's going to have to answer to that, and that's not reasonable now in 2015. And that's, like I said, the reasonableness, where other officers show up and they say, why did you do that? Well, he probably might have just walked home by himself. So officers do understand the use of force policy. It's basically summarizing, do the right thing for the right reasons at the right time, and it shows in our numbers for our use of force has dropped dramatically. So that's all I want to say.
Okay, I'm going to hear from Paul and Siadam, and then we're going to move forward.
The best practice has been thrown out there quite a bit, that word, and it is important to look at that. And New Orleans does have a use of force continuum, however, Seattle does not. PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, just had a conference in August of this year where there were over 300 law enforcement representatives representing over 100 different agencies from federal to state. And they summarized in the report specifically about a use of force continuum. And it says we also need to review the use of force policies which may rely on outdated concepts of a use of force continuum in which levels of resistance are matched to specific police tactics. In the past, this was considered an effective way to provide officers with specific guidance. However, there is increasing understanding that the use of force cannot be measured in such a mechanical way. It is important that this isn't there. I think that it should be removed. It's along with the United States Supreme Court as well as the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Do not follow a use of force continuum. The definition of just looking at New Orleans with another example is instead of a 72-year-old person who threw a punch at somebody, maybe it's somebody with autism, and they throw a punch at an officer. Well, under the New Orleans policy, that's an attack that fits under aggressive resistance. That's somebody that could be tased or beanbags or those kind of things, as Mr. Steenson discussed. However, under the reasonable standard, which would be what we're under, that isn't reasonable. Maybe there's something else needs to be thought about there. So that's a point of concern also. Speaking and just lastly to what Jakari talked about, the length of our forced report or a force policy being 9 pages. The International Association of Chiefs of Police just came out and said that a policy needs to be simple. The longer it is, the harder it is going to be to understand and work with and move forward. Again, the numbers from 2008 show a vast reduction in force, and that's important, and we need to continue doing that, and that will continue with training as well as understanding the policy and incorporating that more and more and more, which we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Siadam. Rochelle, I'm going to cut it off after Siadam. We're going to move forward.
I just have a clarifying question for Tom and the leadership on the use of force subcommittee, and that is, as I'm reading this recommendation, I don't see this as we're deciding between force continuum and reasonableness. I see a clear combination of the two in support of one another. So force continuum is a part of reasonableness. And so that's why I'm seeing all of this as one recommendation. I just want to clarify that that's what's being conveyed from the committee.
Okay.
Yes. The debate that occurs is whether a mechanical use of force continuum, which is what Tasha and Paul are suggesting that we're proposing, is a good idea. And we're not proposing a mechanical use of force continuum. In other words, it is not reasonable under our recommendation to necessarily tase an 87-year-old man who's throwing some worthless punch, because it would be unreasonable to tase that person. So this is a combination of reasonableness, a necessary element, and proportionality. So the upper limit would be what the level of resistance and the level of force would allow, tempered by the question of reasonableness. So Siadam has it correct, and Sharon was actually sort of saying the same thing. So this is not a mechanical model we're proposing. It ultimately has to be reasonable, but the continuum gives guidance, and the current policy has no guidance. It's much like Jaquari says, just do the right thing. What does that mean? And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to provide some guidance as to the upper limit for various levels of resistance, to be trumped by the question of reasonableness.
The question was raised earlier about the list of things and having to vote on the entire list, to vote the entire list up or down if you wanted to select something out. The one controversial item on this list appears to be number C, the question of the use of force continuum. What I would suggest that the body may want to do is extract that and vote on it separately so that it's clear whether you support the use of force continuum. Any discussion on that? Am I clear? Yes, it was. So I'm reaffirming that. I don't want any more further discussion on the issue. I want to talk about getting this out as a separate piece. Okay? Ime?
Restate that.
Okay.
So you want to pull C out?
Pull C out and vote on it separately.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's what you were asking for earlier, yes. So, what we're voting on now are A, B, D, and E in terms of this recommendation. I got no objection from Tom about doing that. Is that right?
I think it probably would take a motion, but
I'm gonna ask for the motion. Can I get that motion to, first of all, let's, yes, bud?
Oh, I was just
Oh,
making the
okay.
motion.
First, I want the motion to take this and consider it separately. Can I have that motion? Bud is made the motion and seconded by Ime. Okay? Huh? The motion is to consider item C in the recommendation 102215-3 separate from the other items. Got it? And I have The motion was made by Bud and seconded by who? Ime. All right. Call the roll. Siadam Edmo.
Aye.
Bud Pulis.
Yes.
Catherine Gardner.
Yes.
Abel Gordley.
Yes.
Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
Ime Curley.
Yes.
Maria Medina. Sharon Marion. Alicia Moreland Capua. V. Revere. Rochelle Silver. Tom Steeson.
Abstain.
Philip Wolf. Okay, the motion is carried, and the motion is to take C out and vote on it separately. So we're going to vote on the other pieces of this first. What's left of the recommendation once that is removed, okay? Can I get a motion?
Second.
I have, Bud has made the motion. Catherine has seconded the motion. Okay, we're going to call the roll. Any more discussion? Did we ask for public input on this one? No. Let's have a little public input.
Hi, Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch. And just to reiterate what it was that Siadam realized reading the proposal, that it is both the reasonableness and the Graham standard, and that you'd have to have some kind of a list of what is the top most amount of force you can use and how those amounts of force relate to each other that is being proposed. And I urge you to vote aye on both of these, particularly because there are existing and proposed directives that say an officer may do this to avoid using a higher level of force. And if you don't know what the higher level of force is, because there's no continuum that lists that, then how can you possibly follow the directive? So I think it's important to have both the reasonable standard and a continuum, and not to go to a mechanical model. I don't think that's what people are talking about. So don't be confused by what's being told to you by other people. The committee has been very clear about what they want to do. Thank you.
Any other public input?
Hi, I did research on the taser portion of this, and I agreed to support the continuum because that's what the Ninth Circuit did.
No.
In each of the cases that I reviewed, they ended up doing a complete and total analysis, including the use of force continuum, as well as all facts were analyzed. And so I don't really care what you decide. But I think every officer needs to be prepared that when they get up in front of a judge, the judge might care.
Thank you, Khalil. Okay, the motion that is on the floor regards to determining the reasonableness of force. It says there should be specific criteria for determining the reasonableness of both the initiation and the continuation of the use of force in any encounter. And it lists the criteria, A, B, D, and E, which you should have on your, okay? We have a motion and a second. I'm going to call the roll. Siadam Edmo.
Aye.
Bud Pulis.
Yes.
Catherine Gardner.
Yes.
Abel Gordley. Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
Ime Curley.
Yes.
Sharon Medina. I'm sorry. Sharon Marion.
Yes.
Alicia Moreland Capua.
Yes.
V. Revere.
Aye.
Rochelle Silver. Tom Steenson.
Yes.
Philip Wolf. The motion is carried. We will handle the second part of this, the use of force continuum. And the recommendation is that that be included in the recommendation that you just approved, okay? So you're going to vote to include or not include this particular part. Do you understand the vote? Okay? So I will call the roll. You're voting on whether or not to include a use of force continuum that emphasizes the requirements that only necessary and proportionate force be used. I need a motion to put that on the floor. May I get a motion? Philip has moved to vote, yes?
Instead of either or, could you move to either remove it or move to keep it? For clarity?
To remove it or keep it? Okay, that's good. You can vote to remove it or to keep it.
You choose.
Is that what you're saying?
Say yes or no to that.
Okay, so I thought we were, oh, okay. Thought we were voting okay, I see what you're saying. All right. I got it. Do you want to keep it? Then you vote yes. If you don't want to keep it, you vote no. Is that what you're saying, Amy?
Move to keep item C is the motion?
Okay.
Yes, I move to keep item C.
Then the second is who? All right, Bud. This one is hard for me. Bud. The motion is to keep item C. All in favor will vote yes, and those opposed will vote no, and those abstentions will say they abstain. I'm now going to call the roll. Siadam Edmo,
Yes.
Bud Pulis,
Yes.
Catherine Gardner,
Yes.
Abel Gordley, Jimmy Johnson,
Yes.
E. McCurley,
Abstain.
abstention, yeah, okay. Sharon Marion,
No.
no. Alicia Moreland Capua, no. V. Revere, Rochelle Silver, Tom Steenson,
Yes.
Philip Wolf. The motion carries. Okay. So the recommendation essentially stands as it was made. Philip.
I'm sorry, I would like to request a 5-minute break. I would
We're
need to
about
use
to
the
take a
restroom.
break. We're about to take a
I
break.
just don't see in the agenda that it has a break, so.
All right, let's take a 10-minute break, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joanne, can you come for a minute? Is there something you want to talk about that's more general than any of
Yes.
this?
Yeah.
Can you tell me what?
Yeah, actually, I want to report back on I want to let the COAB know that I've been in communications with Novak's office. So I want to report back on the request that we've made to Novak's office, which is basically he hasn't done anything yet, but I'm putting pressure.
Okay. Why don't you just, when I call for public comment on the thingy, why don't you just go up and say, look, I want to insert this because this is a place where I can do it and blah, blah, blah. Okay, just make it quick. And just making everybody be quick, okay? Excuse me, I'd like for the COAB members to please be seated so we can resume the meeting. Dr. Marlon Capua has asked for, Capua, huh? I'll get you later, okay. Has asked for a few minutes to wrap something up from our previous session. So you have the floor.
Sure, but other people are still coming in, so we should probably give a
Yeah, we
second.
probably should.
Or close the door.
There's a lot of people out there. Can we get them in? Or quiet, or both?
So I just wanted to, a point of clarification on the last motion that we had. There was some discussion, and I just want to make sure that everybody sort of heard each other. And I think that there was I don't think that everyone has the same interpretation. And I think we may have voted on something where people don't have the same interpretation. So I wanted, just for the record, for there to be some clarification. As I heard the officers give their testimony, that is really loud, they basically had indicated that in the past, the use of force continuum had not been effective and in terms of helping to reduce uses of force, and when they removed it, the numbers or the data suggest that they improved in that area when they moved to the reasonableness of force. And actually, in this particular context, the use of force continuum and the reasonableness standard seem to be in direct contradiction to one another. And if we are, and again, we don't, if we can just respect people's thoughts and opinions without side comments or motions, that would be much appreciated. However, if the goal is for clarification and that we have clarity, I think Dr. Myron brought up a good point, and I'd like to further explore that. And that was, is it possible to have the policy say one thing and then have the other part of the issue be addressed in training? So then that brought me to the question, and I wanted to pose that question to the Portland Police Bureau advisors on this board. Is there or are there a set of clear standards that officers receive that outlines what reasonableness means or looks like, and is it addressed in training anywhere at any time? And I'm asking the advisors, Tom, if you could just hold off for just a second.
Point of order.
No, I'm asking the question, and there is, can we get the question answered first, and then we'd be happy to hear from you.
Paul.
So whenever any use of force, so if it's pepper spray or a taser or it is a beanbag or it is another level of force, there are scenarios that are given to determine and to teach what level that force option is used. Again, when looking at a force continuum, if there is any place, maybe on day one of a force option, to say this is the most. However, you need to take all of these things into consideration per the United States Supreme Court. One of the concerns is that having the two of those, reasonableness as well as a force continuum, and they're like looking at the New Orleans one, where I talked about the autistic person who throws a punch, Now it's time to potentially discipline that officer or look at their behavior, what they did, their actions. And now they've got the argument, well, wait a minute, my policy says I can do it. Well, but this part of the policy says I can't do it. And then that creates confusion, and that, again, was brought up by the U.S. Attorney Adrienne Brown. She's DOJ attorney. She stated that yes, these directives are used for discipline, and that can create confusion because again, you've got one part of the policy says you can do it, another part of the policy says you can't do it. Does that answer the question? Hopefully.
Yeah, is there a framework or training that's provided for officers that helps to clearly delineate what the reasonableness standard means from a sort of the physical manifestation of that, like what that means? Because I think that's where we were sort of debating in terms of, and maybe the word, and I'm not necessarily debating the general gestalt of the statement of the continuum, but maybe it should be restated in a different way. I'm saying for better clarity. Maybe that's not the proper way to address it in this particular policy. I guess that's my point.
Yeah, where it's talked about again is when that new officer comes in, or even in in-service, when we talk about a specific option, there's then, this is where the courts have shown that this option is reasonable. This is where best practices are, and then we go into scenario-based training to then, as a learning environment of, this is where it is reasonable to be used. This is where we find it to be reasonably used. This is where the courts are showing it. So it's a multifaceted way of trying to get that to the officers, and as we've seen, again, with these force numbers dropping by over 50% over the course of the last 7 years.
Thank you.
Okay. This recommendation that was a point of clarification. This recommendation has already been voted on, and so I don't want to revisit the discussion at this point in time. I'd like to move forward to the next recommendation.
Jackson, lastly, and then move on, please.
Well,
and then Tom had a point to make. I just would like to just round it out if we opened up for discussion for clarification.
I'm willing to do that if you don't take more than a minute each.
Okay.
Tom?
I think if the advisors are going to get 5 or 10 minutes now, however long it's taken to speak.
Tom?
I think the public.
What is it that you need to say? What? The point is, this
issue is, as you correctly pointed out, we voted on the on the proposal, the recommendation. We have lots of work to do. If you're going to allow the advisors to revisit the issue for I'm not sure what purpose.
I allowed the advisors to clarify a question that a COAB member had because that member wanted to understand exactly what we were talking about. I allowed that. And so I am squelching. I am.
Allow them the opportunity to clarify before we take the vote.
The question was
Why
not.
are we doing
all right,
that now?
this.
If we've already had the opportunity to clarify before the vote took place.
Okay, we are going to move on now.
Yep.
Okay, the next recommendation. Prohibit the use of deadly force except in very limited extraordinary circumstances is the title. This is a fairly long recommendation. I hope you have it in front of you so that you can follow me as I go through it. Deadly force should be prohibited except in very limited extraordinary circumstances. Deadly force is the application of physical force that under the totality of the facts and circumstances is readily capable or reasonably likely to cause death or serious physical injury. List of examples: shooting a firearm at a person, neck holes, choke holes, and carotid holes, intentional strikes to the head, neck, throat, spine, and kidneys with any impact weapon such as a baton or the officer's feet, knees, fists, and elbows. Pushing or striking a person's head into a hard fixed object. Examples include but are not limited to concrete objects or surfaces or solid metal structures such as bars or guardrails. Shooting a person in the head, neck, throat, spine, and kidneys with a beanbag, shotgun, and ramming a vehicle. Deadly force may only be used in circumstances where the threat of death or serious physical injury to an officer or others is immediate. A danger is immediate only when an objectively reasonable officer would believe that A, the suspect has the means or instrumentalities to do so, and B, the suspect has the opportunity and ability to use the means or instrumentalities to cause death or serious physical injury. A verbal warning that deadly force will be used should be given to the suspect if time, safety, and the facts and circumstances permit. Deadly force may be used to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect only when an objectively reasonable officer would believe that it is necessary and that there is probable cause that A, the suspect has committed or is in the process of committing a felony involving the infliction or threatened infliction of death or serious physical injury. B, the escape of the suspect would pose an immediate danger or death or serious physical injury to another person unless the suspect is apprehended without delay. And C, the officer has given a verbal warning to the suspect if time, safety, and the facts and circumstances permit. That is the proposal prohibiting the use of deadly force except in very limited extraordinary circumstances. Discussion from the COAB, please. Tom.
Very briefly, the recommendation, we believe, is much more comprehensive than the current very limited space given to the use of deadly force in the current directive. It's specific here as to a variety of different ways in which deadly force can result, and so it lays it out to make it clear to officers. And I'll speak to, because I assume there will be someone speaking to the issue. The only objection or opposition that the subcommittee received in this particular recommendation is with respect to neck holds, choke holds, and carotid holds. I'm not sure exactly what that objection is, but you'll probably hear something about that. But we think on balance that it needs to be listed as deadly force, and then later it will be treated in another recommendation.
V.
Madam Chair, is it okay if I direct a question at the chair of the DSUFCS?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
So, Tom, I'm curious, and maybe I'm just categorically getting this all wrong, but how is it possible to include the genital area too with C and E? Or is that my categorically off there, which is okay? Because that can cause, I would think, some serious harm.
I would view that as a friendly amendment.
Okay. Well, when we get to that point, thank you.
Okay. I'm trying to understand what the friendly amendment is the inclusion of strike.
On items C and E, it would expand the areas to include the groin, I guess. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So, Sharon? Okay. Jakari?
So when Alicia asked us a question, like I just came back from training. I've gone through our 40 hours of training and ended.
Is this in reference to what we're talking about now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So as advisors, we want the best feedback on all these, and a lot of this language, it's already in our policy, and so I guess that's kind of where it gets redundant. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that when Alicia asks a question, and like I said, that's why I'm dressed this way. I literally came straight from training, and I'm here. I can answer and talk about that thing because I want the public to understand why we do things the way we do and what our policies are and why our training is reflected by laws and policy and case law and best practices. But when we're told not to speak, and I'm not saying you, but just kind of like, we're not trying to like take up time or anything. We just really want to make things clear and then get good feedback. But I guess this is just a question. Do you guys not want us to do that?
No. Jakari, you are free to speak. You are part of this board. I've allowed you to speak. I need to address this recommendation, okay? And I allowed Paul to speak and answer the question. So there's no conflict here about your ability to speak.
No, and I'm not.
What I'm doing is trying to focus back on the recommendation now.
I understand. I wasn't trying to say that.
Yeah, we have more recommendations than we're going to complete tonight. Yes, Sharon.
I just question again, it seems that the description of deadly force is fairly comprehensive, and it's almost, I think it can be misleading and narrowing to actually delineate examples of deadly force, especially, and I do understand why neck hold is confusing. I mean, a neck hold could be like, I'm not going to grab your neck now, but like, hey, you know, a neck hold to me doesn't mean anything. A chokehold to me, conjures up an idea of what that is. But in talking about shooting different areas of the body, I mean, I've seen people bleed out from shots to the thigh. You know, you can, if you're shot anywhere in a certain way, it can be potentially deadly force. So I mean, I don't understand, why are we trying to potentially limit or have these lists when in the totality of the facts and circumstances is readily capable or reasonably likely to cause death or serious physical injury. I'm not sure why we would narrow that rather than just have it stand as it is the broad encompassing, and then during the training, go like in law school. That's how we figure out what reasonableness means, is we go through different trainings and circumstances, and that is what teaches us. But the main crux of this, I believe, is what is reasonable in the circumstances, and it's only limiting to say, you know, if you're going to say pushing or, you know, there's infinite varieties of what can be deadly force. Why would we try to limit that with a list?
Discussion? Tom?
One of the principles I think that people have learned in looking at law enforcement agencies and trying to help officers as much as help the community is to give them guidance as to when, if it's possible, a certain type of force isn't going to be permitted. And part of educating and having a policy that's comprehensive, and understand this is really not a lot different in terms of this list than the Portland's current policy. It incorporates some things from New Orleans, some things from Seattle that specify what constitutes deadly force. And there really isn't any dispute by the police advisors other than there's been concern expressed about what a neck hold means. The subcommittee felt that if you're grabbing somebody around the neck, that's potentially going to kill somebody, and so it should be considered deadly force. Didn't seem difficult to the subcommittee. But beyond that, Sharon, I understand what you're saying, but giving guidance to officers, making sure they understand what can constitute deadly force, the subcommittee believes, as do other law enforcement jurisdictions, as does the current policy, believes that that's important.
Yeah, in response to your comment, Sharon, your concern with that, the reasoning for the list here, and maybe it's already in the policy, but the specifics are included here in the list. They're in the list here, but they're not in that policy, and it's supposed to be more comprehensive, get at the point of what's okay, what's not okay, is in regards to deadly force. And the neck hold was one that the Data Systems Use of Force Compliance Subcommittee, we talked about. We feel that neck hold should be forbidden, and we feel that should not, the police advisors felt that it should be permitted, and we disagreed with them. And we wanted to have a clear understanding of what's considered use of force, what's not considered use of force. So that's just one example of that in there. And I just feel that it's important to understand the meaning behind all of these items listed in here. Did that answer your question or get at your question?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Amy?
I'm wondering if we could just change a little bit of the language, so where it says examples include, Tom, if we could say examples can include but are not limited to, and if that will address part of this issue. Do you need me to say that slower so you know what I just said?
So this is an offer of another friendly amendment that would change the language, which would also capture, I think, these friendly amendment. Examples can include but are not limited to. Go ahead, Tom.
I don't think the subcommittee views that as friendly. The use of the word can equivocates as to those types of forces, the force that's laid out here. And we don't intend to equivocate.
So you're not...
This is deadly force. There may be other examples we haven't listed, but these are examples of deadly force.
Can you say that again, Tom, please?
When you add the word can, I think that makes the statement about examples equivocal. And the subcommittee believes that these 8 or 9 examples are deadly force. Not that they can be, they are.
So I guess what I was trying to say is that these are examples, right? So I don't think we're disagreeing. So maybe my language isn't quite what it needs to be. That these are examples of deadly force, but what I'm hearing sort of Sharon objecting to is the idea that these are examples, but there are other examples, right? We can't list all of the examples. So if we can capture both of those sentiments by saying examples include these things, but are not limited to these things, then maybe that would be clearer. Does that feel less clear to you as the chair?
That's friendly. I understand it. That would work.
Would you repeat that, please, Amy?
So where it says examples include, I hear that Tom doesn't want that word can because it feels equivocal. So can it say examples include but are not limited to the following, which would be these A through F things?
And I think I saw Philip's hand.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. If, for example, with that choke hold or neck hold, maybe for there's a situation where there's a neck hold involved and it's not considered a deadly use of force. But what we're seeing is in any situation, that neck hold should be considered a deadly use of force. And so we're including it in the recommendation as the specifics on which actions are use of force and which are considered then deadly uses of force. So I can understand a lot of situations that might be a use of force that you wouldn't be calling those or designating those as deadly uses of force, but these are what we are considering deadly use of force. Does that help to clarify?
Tasha, then Paul, and then Abel.
So I guess just briefly, I'll give my own 2 cents on the neck hold, and I would say no, it doesn't qualify because I have no idea what you're actually trying to describe to me would be deadly force. If I were to do what? Grab the back of somebody's neck? Is that a neck hold? Do I have to put both hands? Is it just my arm? Is it the back of my elbow on somebody's neck? So to me, a neck hold is completely confusing and non-clarifying. And I think one of the other challenges is it either is deadly force. So if you are to say, well, a neck hold could not be deadly force, but we're going to call it deadly force, that doesn't quite seem right. If you're going to do something that's not deadly force, it's not deadly force. And it just needs to be very clear. So to me, the Cartwright hold makes sense. Even a choke hold, if you're choking somebody out, I could see where that would make sense. And then the other piece that would be important about the confusion with neck hold is how that applies in the reverse. So if somebody has me in a neck hold, now I'm justified in using deadly force. Does that mean if they have one hand on my neck, 2 hands on my neck, an arm around my neck? Am I bent over? Are they behind me? What does that mean and what does that look like? So I think that terminology is very confusing.
Okay, I think I had Paul and then Abel.
Thank you. To say that there weren't any objections isn't quite accurate. I think in this recommendation C, is very similar to in the next recommendation, D. So and there was some, basically in the con statements or the advisor's statements, I mentioned that the objections I had were more in that one than this one. They really kind of apply because they're almost the same. So we can talk
When
about
you
it
say
here
that
for
one,
the next one.
when you say that one, to what are you referring,
So
please?
the next recommendation, number 5D.
Okay, so we'll deal with that when we get to it.
Okay, 'cause
Five,
it's
that's the
same
next
as this one.
set of recommendations, the next,
Yeah, so
okay.
I guess the question I would have is that D in the next one and C in this one are kind of the same. So do we talk about them both, or do we
no,
wait?
we talk about one at a time.
Okay.
We're going to talk about this one, and if there's something that's related to that, you can refer back to this, but we can't do but one at a time.
Then I can talk about this one because it applies
Okay.
also. Let me know when you want me to do that.
If you raised your hand, you have the floor right now
Okay.
for the next probably minute.
Okay. One of the things that we put regarding the strikes with the knees, fist, elbows, talked about in the next one as well as in this one that would be considered deadly force, and that it's referring to best practices and other Seattle and New Orleans. However, the recommendation does not incorporate those from either one of those agencies. And again, as Tosh had mentioned too, is a strike. So if somebody punches, a punch to the head would be considered deadly force under both of these. If I see somebody punching somebody else in the head at, say, a bar fight in the parking lot, is that deadly force? Or if somebody tries to throw a punch at me, again, is it likely to cause deadly force? A punch to the head? Because it cause injury? Absolutely. It could absolutely cause deadly force. I think that's absolutely debatable. We see that in just UFC fights every week, it seems.
Okay, did I have someone else?
Biggest knockdown, drag-out fight you've ever seen.
Abel.
They do. They're on TV all the time.
Thank you. Before we vote, I just want to make sure that we hear the voices of all of our police advisors. We've heard from Paul, we've heard from Tasha. I'm not sure that we heard from Jakari on this one. We did? And Michelle? Have we heard your voice on this one? Michelle? And then I also want to acknowledge that there are a couple of other folks out in the audience with the Bureau who may have a perspective on this particular issue. You know who you are. This would be a good time to hear those perspectives as well.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's on the agenda.
That's the point.
It'll happen.
That's the point.
So where are we with the, hold on, Philip, just a minute. There's been a request from the COAB member that the advisors, that all of the advisors speak to this issue. And okay, Michelle?
So I'm in agreement with Tasha and Paul on this too. When you talk about a neck hold, defining that, what is that? What does that look like? I had some concern over that. We already have it in our use of force policy that a carotid hold is deadly force. I'm not sure what a neck hold means either. I mean, if I reach over and I put my arm around Jimmy and I put my arm around his neck, is that considered deadly force? In my opinion, no. And it's the same thing with a strike or a punch to the face. I've been hit in the face, so did I consider that deadly force by that person? No. I've struck people in the face. Do I consider that deadly force? No. Especially when I'm defending myself, obviously. So I think there's a lot of confusion there of how to define these out and what we're looking at with this. And I think that's where you've seen Paul and Tasha, talk about things as far as definitions. And until, like I said, we don't know, what does a neck hold mean? I think you look at it in these other policies that have it, there's not big definitions on what that means. It just says neck hold. So I think until we can define that out a little bit more, it's very confusing. And I'm not sure how you would teach officers proper use of that or non-proper use of that So that's my thoughts on it.
Jakari?
I mean, basically, it's the reasonableness. Is it reasonable that someone that comes at me and tries to throw a punch at me, are they trying to kill me? No, they're trying to hurt me. That's my interpretation of when someone's coming at me. When you start putting labels on, well, I throw a punch, that's deadly force. Well, it's the intent behind it. If I take a knife and I drive it through Dennis, me driving a knife into his chest, a reasonable person would think that I'm trying to kill him. I think that's where we need to look at, once again, the reason why reasonableness, were you reasonably scared for your life to die, or were you reasonably in fear that you were going to suffer serious physical harm or injury? Those are two different things, so.
Thank you, Jakari. We've had a request from a COAB member that some of the officers in the audience may want to respond to this. Introduce yourself, please.
I'm Mike Krebs. I'm one of the assistant chiefs. I think Avel was looking at me. So, I think that as I'm hearing the conversation, I think we don't want to get too specific and exclude too many things. Let me explain something. Let's say that, hypothetically, that if a punch to the face by the right person could be deadly force. So say that I, Mike Krebs, I'm an average guy, and you have someone who may be some kind of MMA fighter, and he's starting to throw punches at me. That may be a deadly force situation for me. It may not be a deadly force situation for some other police officer who may have the skills that I don't have. So we got to make sure we don't put officers in too narrow of a scope, because these things come from nowhere. You have no idea who's coming at you. You also may be, at times, you may be, maybe you get hit and you fall and you become injured. And now even an average-sized person who's throwing punches at your head can now be a deadly force situation. Because one thing we have to keep in mind, too, is there's so many different things going on that every time we bring a police officer to a scene, there is a gun involved. And so an officer could actually be knocked out, hit in the face, and now the gun is now available for someone to have. So we got to constantly keep thinking that you can't have a specific restrictions in deadly force. It has to be reasonable under the totality of the circumstances. So that's just kind of my take, is that's, yeah.
Hold on. Was there anybody else from the police department? Hold on, you'll get your chance. Public. Okay, then we have Philip, and then Sharon, and then we're gonna.
Yeah, it's always so short, I'm sorry. I'll be quick just to add to this. Now it's too loud, apologize for that. So AC, Krebs, and I, 4 hours a week, we attempt to write policy. The only thing I'll add to this, I think it might be a little bit clarifying. For some of the definitions, we go by ORS, Oregon Revised Statute, of what deadly force is. And then I think to address some of the points that Mr. Stevenson's bringing up, then we try to train to those legal standards. For example, some of the places you said would be deadly force if you struck a person there. You could train to those of red zones or strike zones, whatever terminology you want to put on it, to avoid striking people in such a manner in those zones, because they could lead to something. So you have the legal definition of what the standards are, and then you have to have a different section of policy and practice and training to that. And I think the combination of that accomplishes what you're doing. To put deadly force and give a laundry list of definitions, I think is confusing and problematic. So it's a legal standard you train to, and then you could clarify that with zones that we do teach not to strike due to higher levels of outcomes of serious physical injury or for deadly force.
Okay, thank you. Now, did I have Philip and then you? Yes, Philip.
With all due respect, we are discussing about how officers approach a citizen, a community member, anyone out there. We're not talking about how the community members are approaching officers and their interactions. Right now, we're only focusing on how officers engage with members physically of the community. So a neck hold, in my opinion, should be labeled deadly force, whatever the situation, that choke hold. So I think want to clarify that's what we're discussing here. I also can't imagine if somebody tried to hit me as an individual, I would try to avoid that punch or use the tools I have, being able to defend myself. But I can't imagine how it would work if someone tried to hit me. I would immediately engage in a chokehold. That's unreasonable. So that chokehold can stop breathing and should be labeled as deadly force. I feel very strongly that that should be completely prohibited. And also, I think we need to remember that police have tools. They have tasers, they have weapons, they have guns, they have nightsticks, they have, protective clothing. These citizens have no protective clothing. They have none of these tools. So I see a difference with these officers and with the community members. And officers have training. They have experience. They have gear. They have all these tools at their disposal. But police are encouraging us that they should be allowed to use the carotid hold, which could result in death. So that's one of my main concerns.
Sharon?
So I think this is more a point of clarification or a question, maybe for the officers or whoever has the answer. What is currently included? I couldn't discern from all of this. What is currently in the policy? Separate and apart from what's in the ORS, what is there already? And I think that'll have a big impact on sort of my feeling, that sort of gauging what this is trying to do compared to what already exists. And I do still feel that a chokehold and a carotid hold are clearly defined, and that's something that is objectively identifiable. I, both as a layperson and as a physician, have no idea what a neck hold would be, and I think that I really do think that's problematic for police. And so are you able to answer the question specifically about what the policy is that already is in place? That's the only question I have. Okay.
Okay, Tom?
The neck hold is not in the current policy. And I would suggest, as we handled the use of force continuum, that we could remove the neck hold and vote on that separately.
What else, though, of that big list?
And then the issue about, the other issue that the advisors are raising is about the use of body parts to strike someone. And the baton, to start with, is the only quote-unquote impact weapon in the current policy that they reference. You can have a flashlight that may amount to an impact weapon, but the policy says batons are not to be used to strike someone in the head because it's deadly force. Now, unless deadly force is justified. What the subcommittee felt was kicking somebody in the head, using a knee, using an elbow, to strike someone in the head, and I asked Paul about this, and I think Paul told me that you could do that with as much force as a baton. And if a baton is classified as deadly force, we felt that the use of body parts to strike someone in those vulnerable areas should also be classified as deadly force, because the issue isn't the instrumentality, the issue is what is it potentially going to do. You know, a baton's not always going to kill you.
Right, so what is it current, what is it
Just baton.
currently? So it's baton, choke holds, and carotid holds is all that is listed currently?
No.
In the current policy?
No, on the issues we're talking about.
No,
I mean, in this.
What is being asked here, I think, is what is the current policy for the PPB?
That this is replacing.
Yes.
Thank you. Awesome, thank you very much. Right, which makes, this makes sense. So I would just incorporate what deadly physical force is defined in ORS statute. I mean, that seems to be a pretty good list of deadly force. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it exists. It's a statute. It's existing in the policy. I am done.
Yes.
I think the point that
Is,
Trying to clear up here is, from the document we have in front of us. What is the statutory language in the document that we have in front of us?
in this document, what I'm not,
We can't hear. I'm sorry.
okay.
Can we identify the language in the current recommendation that is drawn from current ORS?
I thought that's what the piece was that you just had, Sharon, was it not?
That identified what the ORS.
She got to see it, that's
Okay,
fine.
yes. Okay.
I'm saying let's identify it on this document, okay?
I don't know that it is in
Because to me, it is important
here.
to,
That's,
instead of just, to me, I don't know if this is coming just that this was, came out of the ether, or whether this
Yeah,
was something
yeah.
that has been amended, or is something that is in statute. What was it? What's in statute,
I hear what you're
and
saying.
what was changed?
and I'm
Track
asking if
document.
there's somebody who can answer that, or, Tom, can you answer that? What is, the question is, what was existing?
We didn't look at statutes. This is a
Okay, so what
policy.
was existing is my question.
And I've told you the two things that I believe were not pre-existing, and that is neck holds and the use of feet, elbows, knees.
So are you saying then that, except for those things, this is the same as what exists right now in the Portland Police Bureau policy?
I'm not going to say that because I'm not certain.
Okay.
Some of
Why
it,
has to be
some,
certain?
well, I can't tell you that. Some of it has come from New Orleans and Seattle.
Okay, VSU.
Because what we're trying to do is put a policy together. Because the statute doesn't lay out those kinds of specifics, by and large. It just doesn't do that.
V and then Jimmy?
Actually, I think Paul was before me.
We should call them.
Okay.
Just go ahead.
You want to give it up?
Thank you, B. Thank you, thank you. What's existing now is the reasonable standard, just as the Assistant Chief was talking about that. You look at the individual use of force to determine the seriousness of it. What is it capable of doing? Who is it that's, maybe throwing the strike or the impact? Who's throwing the kick? And who is it against? And it's each individual thing is looked at to determine the reasonableness. So that's really what's existing now. And again, the impacts and deadly force, that's not in any of the Seattle or New Orleans policies.
All right, V?
So I have a quick question for Dr. Marion. Myron, oh yeah, well, you just go ahead and
Myron,
try.
like in-
You could try my name any day of the week.
I'm not, V works for me.
You can just call me V. Anyway, I apologize. So here's a question I have, and I hope to clarify or streamline this process. So if somebody uses their knee with a high amount of force against, to strike a spleen, is it possible that that person could potentially die or experience some amount of extreme physical damage?
Is it theoretically possible? Sure. Is it likely? I mean, you would have to be aiming for the spleen. I mean, that's what concerns me here, is that in theory, anything you can trip in the wrong way and hit hit a weird part of your body and do severe damage. But delineating all these different things does not make it likely, or theoretically anything is possible. But
Okay, so theoretically, and we can go hypothetically, and we can talk like that, or we can think about the
I've never
impact-
seen someone, I've seen a lot of people coming in with trauma into the emergency department. I've never seen anyone who has been severely injured or died from a knee to the spleen. There's a specific.
Okay, so my point is, I think that if we don't provide some guiding principles, then our community, which includes, for me anyway, my friends on the PPB, then it disavows them the opportunity of taking care and concern with what Sayadom was clearly and I think eloquently put out earlier about the dignity of life. And I think that's the value that this particular element of the recommendation brings to our community. Okay?
I could not be more supportive of the dignity and the value of life. And I'm not sure how we just got from knee to spleen to that, but I think we need to cut the conversation short.
Yeah, I do too. I guess that's my ultimate point.
And yeah, maybe we should just.
Yeah, I want to hear from Jimmy, then I want to take some public comment, then I want to wrap this up as to which way we're going to go with this recommendation. So Jimmy?
Well, listen to all the conversations from around the table, what I've heard. One of the main things was a question about the neck hold and what defines a neck hold and what does that mean, definitions of that. And what I wanted to say was just let's strike the neck hold. I'm going to move to amend that and strike the neck hold and go for a vote. That's what I want to do.
Thanks, Jimmy. Can
after public comment.
Yeah. Pardon me?
After public comment.
Okay. Public. Okay. Okay.
So I agree. I totally agree with Jimmy. But I think there's going to need to be voting for the deadly force, given all the totality of the circumstances. There'll be a version with everything but the neck holds, and then there'll be the version with the neck holds. Are we going to do that, or else I think it's going to be? I don't think. I believe in preventing deadly force, but I don't believe in some of the others.
Strike the neck holds.
But no, in the neck holds. I believe in the strike. I would strike the neck holds for sure. Okay.
Seattle.
The committee has provided in their packet definitions from the New Orleans Police Department that define what is a neck hold. So if folks turn to that, it's on the page 3 of 12 of the giant packet.
So I don't know what that is.
So, sorry, it's after page 37, the numbered page. After page 37, there is an excerpt, and then on page 3 of that excerpt is the definition of what a neck hold is.
Can I get a definition somewhere?
Let's go back here. Let's read your packet for a bit. There's a page 38.
H, neck holds, choke holds, and carotid holds.
Carotid.
We are contentious tonight, aren't we?
I'm not getting it.
It's so it's the big one, page 38. So
Have you figured it out? 'Cause I haven't.
I don't know.
37?
Yeah, page 3 of 12. I'm just trying to.
34. Can you help me make sure I'm getting?
So, yeah, here. Pass mine around. I don't know.
And I'm just going to keep talking as folks have found that this particular issue is primarily the reason why I was compelled to join this committee. And I'd just like to call into context the experience of Lloyd Stevenson and his family. So I just want to go on record. This particular issue and the use of that we're discussing of the chokehold as deadly force is the issue that compelled me to join this board and do this work. In April of 1985, Lloyd Stevenson was killed using the chokehold, and my mom actually served on the committee with Penny Harrington that she pulled together around that, and it's the reason why I'm here and doing this work. So just for context and understanding of how serious this is, I just want to call that into the room, and that's all.
All right. I'd like to. Excuse me. Yes, that's where we're going right now. I'm sure that Dan is signed up for this, and Joanne, and Dan, do you want to start?
Thank you. I'm Dan Handelman again with Portland Cop Watch. This first comment is what's written on our page. We're asking you, and if it's going to take more time, then don't worry about it. We'll just tell the Bureau directly. To the deadly force recommendation to capture that for deadly force to be used, the suspect must pose an immediate threat along the lines of what's described in the aggressive resistance definition in New Orleans Taser Directive. It describes attempt to attack or actual attack and behaviors like lunging and striking, and cautioning that neither passive or active resistance, including fleeing, pulling away, verbal statements, bracing, or tensing, constitute aggressive resistance. Right now, the proposal allows deadly force if the suspect only has the means and opportunity and ability to cause death or serious injury, which doesn't show that they're actually engaging in some behavior that leads you to believe they're going to use that ability. That's of concern. There are two section C's. I'm sure you've seen this because you've been looking at this over and over again. It says A, B, C, C, E, F. That was one of those typos that I think the committee was afraid to correct because they thought they'd be called on the carpet for making a decision like that outside of a meeting. If the training has the something in it, it should be in the policy. You made a decision about that already because that was a proposal that we brought forward. So if you're being told that something is being taught in the training, it should be in the policy too. I'm very glad that Ms. Edmo again found the neck hold definition. Just for the people in the audience who aren't finding that page, it says neck holds include armbar control holds, holds that inhibit breathing by compression of the neck, carded restraint holds, lateral vascular neck constraint, and hold with a knee or other object on the back of a subject's neck. A neck hold is considered lethal force right here in the New Orleans document, which we were told it was not in just a minute ago. And the existing language in the directive, which references the state law, speaks about specific items such as flashlights and batons and things that might be used. So there is a precedent in the existing policy to have a list of what might constitute deadly force so that officers know what it is and the community knows what it is. And I also appreciate the board member who brought up that we're not talking about, I think it was Mr. Wolf, that we're not talking about what the community member is doing to the officers. We're talking about what the officers are doing to the community. Thank you.
We're going to hear from Joanne.
Thank you. Whoa. My name is Joanne Hardesty, and the issue of use of force, I hear a lot of conversation about why do we need such detailed definitions, and I'll give you two names, James Chassie and Aaron Campbell. We know that James Chassie was stomped to death by law enforcement officers on the street downtown Portland. That's a fact. We know that Aaron Campbell was shot and killed by a sharpshooter police officer when the situation had been de-escalated. We also know when those officers went to testify in the Aaron Campbell case, all the training officers locked arms and said, "Oh no, that wasn't in our training. That we followed policy and procedures." And so for those of you who are just wondering why the necessity to have every word possible in the document, it is because as a community, we've seen that if it's not spelled out, if it's not specific, then there will be no accountability. That is why. I actually wanted to talk and tell you how proud I am of you, all of you, even the police members. I know what a difficult job you have. I know how much time you're taking away from your family. I know how much time you could be doing fun things, and instead you're locked in conference rooms and you're looking through policy and you're debating some incredibly hard stuff. I want you to know that we've got your back, all of you. And I want you to know I did follow up with Commissioner Novick. I think I may have a stalking charge coming because I am calling his office every other day, demanding a response. And so I just want you to know that I hear you when you say you need support The community has your back. And if it's not gonna be Commissioner Novak that's gonna lead the charge, we'll find another commissioner that has more backbone to lead the charge. So I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Any other, yes, Sean.
So I'm Sean Fields. Tom, I think this is a good start, but I think you might want to consider like bringing the humanity back into the whole thing, especially for the police officers, since they're the one who is going to have to somehow change the way that they're doing something right now to incorporate all of these recommendations. But I like the way you did it. And I think that you should remember that there are 3 other committees. So while you're forging ahead doing this work, how does it tie in with all the rest of the committees? And how does this work allow for the police to be accountable for their actions? So just keep that in mind.
Yes, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Yes, you may speak.
My name is Jack Herbert. There's several points. I think it's real obvious, like they said, this is only for actions by police officers. The other actions against police officers is another discussion. Neck holds. I think it's real clear. Stay away from the neck. Don't touch it. Necks are extremely fragile. You notice our spines go all the way up. Our bodies are real wide here. It's not much body around the spine here. There's not much body around the airway. There's not much body around the esophagus. And if somebody just punches right here, I think that can cause an awful lot of damage, and it could be fatal. I think you better stay away from the neck. And examples, like the point is, I think Sharon said there are an infinite number of things. We can't list them all. But the more we list, the more you know. And that's why. And I have a concern about the middle of this paragraph here, is that deadly force may be used only in the circumstances where the threat of death or serious personal injury to an officer or others is immediate. And then it says, when an objectively reasonable officer would believe that the suspect has the means or instrumentalities to do so. If I'm sitting on the ground, engaged in nonviolent civil disobedience, and there's a rock beside me, there's the instrument. And if I'm able to pick it up and throw it at you, then I have the ability. So therefore, the officer is entitled to kill me because there's a rock sitting beside me. That's what this says, right? I think you need to put something else into this. I don't think you have to deal with the intention too, unless there's some and this gets very subjective. So if I get outraged and I talk back to an officer, he may think that I'm the kind of person that's going to try to strike him. And if he gets angry, his judgment is affected if we get into an ego struggle. So this is a very hard thing. And so if I have a rock nearby me, then he says, well, he's giving mouthing off at me. I don't like it. Bang. Because I'm a threat to him. And I don't think that's I don't think these guidelines are sufficient. I think you need, I don't know how to do it, but you need something more than just having an object that can cause harm and the physical ability to use it.
Sharon.
I just wanted to speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got more public comment. I didn't see that. Okay. Barbara.
Hi, I'm Barbara Ross. I just wanted to reinforce the definition of neck hold that Dan Handelman read, because I'm not sure all the committee was able to find that in your big fat reference. Neck hold. One of the following types of holds: arm bar control hold, a hold that inhibits breathing by compression of the airway in the neck. Carotid restraint hold, a hold that inhibits blood flow by compression of the blood vessels in the neck. A lateral vascular neck constraint or for a hold with a knee or other object to the back of a prone subject's neck. A neck hold is considered lethal force. It is possible that you may want to include this definition as a footnote to clarify what you mean by neck hold. And that's in Chapter 13, page 3 of 12 in your big fat folder. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Anyone else from the public? Okay. Sharon.
First, I'll work backward, but first of all, thank you for that. I was searching all over for the definition, could not find it. That is a definition, and that is clarifying, and I agree. If that is included to explain what neck hold is, that makes a tremendous difference. So thank you for finding it. And I also wanted to speak to Joanne and say thank you. I'm crying, sorry.
Okay.
I just wanted to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
it's okay, just,
I apologize.
It's okay.
it's okay. I just wanted to say thank you for thanking all of us. And it's, again, I might not be able to say it. It's,
Yeah, no hurry.
Thanks. It's really important to kind of keep our humanity and our civility during this process, even at times when we don't agree. And I really appreciate your calling out sort of that appreciation, because we are trying, everyone here, everyone there is trying to do what's right. So thank you.
Philip.
Done.
I have a question that to no one in specific, but it's something that I've been thinking about a bit. So the chokehold should be allowed. Does that mean if people are in support of the chokehold, does that mean it's taught during training?
Is the question, is the chokehold taught during training?
Yes, that's what I'm asking, is
Falcon.
why officers are saying that it should be allowed.
No, they're not.
Because we feel that it should be prohibited. Does that mean that they're required to teach the chokehold? Or I'm just wondering why people are encouraging that to be permitted, and if it is included in training, then if it is permitted.
Can you clarify, Paul?
It is discussed in training as categorically being deadly force, the carotid hole. It's spelled out that way in the directive, and that it is only used when deadly force is authorized. So it's a deadly force thing. Why I think officers would want that option available to them is that if their life is on the line and that is the only option available to them to save their life or somebody else's life, do we take that option away from the officer so that they can't do that? But again, it's categorically, the carotid hold categorically categorized as deadly force.
Tom, then Bud, and then we're going to wrap.
Why do we have an issue then if it's there? If you've already got it in there, I think it should just be put down clearly in that section as deadly force.
Yes, it is deadly force. It's prohibiting it, meaning you can't ever use it. Well, if somebody's life's on the line, you can't use a potential option. I don't know if that's reasonable.
Who did I? Bud?
Tom was first.
With Tom, then Bud.
The subcommittee had two reasons for prohibiting it entirely. First, we didn't think that a use of force that the Bureau doesn't train on should be allowed. You know, they train on the use of a firearm, they train on the use of a baton. They do not train on neck holds, choke holds, and carotid holds. Secondly, a discussion we had with Paul, I believe, and I'm not sure we have complete information, but as far as I know, I think as far as Paul knows, since the carotid hold in 1985, neck holds, choke holds, and carotid holds have not been used by the police bureau officers. So it's obviously really not necessary, and we just think it should be prohibited.
There is a caveat to this prohibition as I read it. Excuse me? As I read this, it says, except in extraordinary circumstances. Am I understanding that correctly? Very limited, extraordinary. So it's not absolutely you never can use it. It has to be an extraordinary circumstance. Is that what is being said here in this proposal?
We wanted to make sure we defined what was deadly force.
Okay.
Unequivocally.
Okay.
That's what we're trying to do.
But I'm hearing I'm hearing another question being raised. Jakari?
One, we know the severity of grabbing someone's neck any kind of way looks horrible. It's the way that someone breathes. So we're advised highly not to grab people by the neck, period. And if you do grab someone by the neck, the question is going to be asked, well, why did you not grab their arm or somewhere else? It's all about, like, once again, reasonableness. I know that Philip brought up the point about the way that we approach citizens, and it's not about the citizens approaching us, but it all is interchangeable. It goes hand in hand. Just like an officer that's on my shift that was stabbed in his hand multiple times, and then when he fell back and the person jumped on top of him, he broke his other hand. If he had been by himself, both of his hands are completely disabled. If that means that he's able to get that person in a hold because he's being stabbed to death, and you're going to prohibit him from trying to save his life because he doesn't have function of his hands, and he didn't, then, like I said, it all goes hand in hand with the use of force, where I get called to a scene, I'm assessing the person, and then if that person engages in aggressive behavior or any type of behavior where that transparency and where they're trying to use deadly force on me, then that makes me have to react in a different manner, which is all in the policies. You can't have one without the other, action versus reaction. It's not trying to be offensive, but at the same time, that's what it is. It's all together.
Bud, and then we're going to stop for a minute.
So actually, my question is more procedural and directed towards you, Kathleen. So at this point, some of us may be wishing to vote for this, some people may be wishing to vote against it, and then some people, like myself, might be thinking, gee, I wish there was the opportunity to do a little more work on this back in subcommittee. So when we get to voting this, were it to not receive an approval vote, would the subcommittee then have the opportunity to rework it and bring it back to the COAB? Or do we actually need a motion to send this back to subcommittee to do something like that?
First of all, okay, yes. First of all, we don't have a motion to accept this proposal yet. So the possibility of other motions still exists. And what my intent was here was to say, in summary, this is a very complicated proposal. I have so far 3, I think, friendly amendments, including add groin to the list, add the definition of neck hold, and add the phrase include and not limited to the following. I also hear, and maybe I'm mistaken, I hear people discussing absolutes where I don't see them. The discussion on this is this or that seems polarized and not inclusive of the language here, which says except in limited extraordinary circumstances. So the question would be something about definition of extraordinary circumstances, perhaps, but it does not absolutely forbid any of the things in the list. It says you will take a lot of consideration before you use them. Paul, would you like to speak?
I think the confusion on the carotid hole and prohibiting it, that's in the next recommendation.
That is not on this recommendation.
No, not on
this
this
is the
one.
this is the one.
It's on the next
This is
one.
the one we're working with.
And
Okay.
I think that's where
And this is going to be probably the last one for the evening.
I think we're just getting them confused.
And these were prioritized. I asked to have them prioritized so that we dealt with the most important ones first. So let's be thorough with this and make some decisions on it. Rochelle.
I would like to make a motion to vote on this recommendation with friendly amendment. Can you use the mic? With friendly amendment 1, adding the groin. With friendly amendment 2, examples included but are not limited to the following. But I think the amendment number 3 is, oh, you changed it. Okay.
Point of order, I heard Kathleen mention 3. I don't know that it was offered as a friendly and accepted though.
I thought it was, yeah. I thought I
Okay,
heard
and
that.
to include friendly amendment 3.
Okay.
I'd like to second that.
And second is B. All right. I'm not going to read this. I think that we've gone through it. You have the proposal before you, which prohibits the use of deadly force except in very limited extraordinary circumstances, defines deadly force, gives examples of deadly force, also restricts deadly force to use where threats of death or serious physical injury to an officer or others is immediate, and the definition of immediate. It also stipulates that a verbal warning must be given, and it may be used to prevent the escape of a fleeing suspect only when an objectively reasonable officer would believe that it's necessary and there's a probable cause that, and then there are 3 points below that to say what that probable cause looks like. Do you understand the recommendation? I'm about to, did I have a second? I know Rochelle, okay. So we have a motion that has been moved and seconded, and now I am about to call the roll for the vote. Siadam Edmo.
Aye.
Bud Pulis.
Yes.
Catherine Gardner.
Yes.
Gardner. Abel Gordley.
Yes.
Jimmy Johnson.
Yes.
Ime.
Yes.
All right, Maria never showed. Sharon.
Yes.
Alicia.
Yes.
V.
Aye.
Rochelle.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Philip.
Yes.
The motion passes. Yes, Tom.
Could I just recognize the community for just 1 second?
Yeah.
I think there were some excellent points made about the question of intent or language being added, and the subcommittee is going to revisit that issue. And as I spoke about earlier, this is not a one-time deal. I mean, we can continue to propose important changes, and we're going to address that or take a good look at it.
I want to thank Mandy and Amy for the creation of this magic chart here that lets us see what we're doing, lets us see who did what, and lets us see if a motion has passed or failed. I really appreciate the work that you've done and the work that you continue to do to keep this moving forward. Thank you very much. We have about 7 minutes left before we adjourn this meeting. We can choose to adjourn early, or if there are any items of business that you would like to discuss within 7 minutes. Bud.
And I'll just try to take one. Tonight may have felt difficult, but I wanted to say that I feel this was actually one of the most productive COAB meetings I've ever sat in. Especially I wanted to thank the members of the public who brought some very important ideas to the table and stimulated some very valuable thinking that's going to improve these recommendations. I hope that you will reach out and bring more citizens to our meetings in future, because the more we put our nose to the grindstone with these recommendations, the better and more valid and more powerful our work is going to be, because then it represents you. So thank you again for coming tonight.
And I want to compliment you on what have been thorough discussions and the inclusion of our advisors and the thoughts from both the public and the COAB members. I really appreciate the work you've done, and I think this, again, I would support that this is a very productive meeting tonight. Thank you very much. I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Excuse me?
Next meeting, since they're not all up on the website.
I can't, I'm
Announce the next meeting.
the 14th of January? It's not on the web? We haven't decided where the location is yet? They're on the website. I haven't looked at it. Okay, one of them, Mandy, do you have them, do we have two meeting dates? I know we have a retreat. Okay, all right. We don't have a date for the second one. All right, Abel?
Kathleen, would you just say a few words that update us on where we are with the retreat?
Ah. Oh, boy. So you all got sent the information on the retreat? Yes. Some of you have responded from the survey that I asked you to respond to by tomorrow close of business, which will give us input as to what you would like to see happen with this retreat. Meanwhile, I have sent out emails to 4 excellent providers of facilitation services, and I'm waiting to hear back from them. Some of the choices will, who is chosen will depend upon the kind of skills they demonstrate in terms of being able to manage a retreat like this. This is unusual. It's 2 days, I mean, it's a week apart. It's 2 days, but it's a week apart. What kind of, these are all highly recommended people that have been in the business a long time. There's no, you know, they're top notch. Anyway, I will send you out who they are. I will send the names to you. I'm waiting for their responses as of the close of business today. Someone will be selected. I can probably send you some criteria if I sit and think a little bit more about it, about what the criteria for selection would be. Part of that would be budget. Okay, so let that be clear. Yes, V.
One of the things that hasn't been clear to me, and I have an incredibly jam-packed schedule, is how long this retreat is. I can't say yes or no if I don't know if it's
in the information.
It's
9 to 5 both
9
days.
to 5.
Yes, 9 to 5 both days. And if you can only make one day, try to make the first day, because that's a day that we'll spend getting to know each other better.
Oh, I know you guys.
Well, I hope that you'll try to get to the retreat. I think it's very important for us to know each other better and to talk about how we work together and, you know, other things that are relevant to our functioning, not COAB business. Yes, Tom?
Is it going to be a public meeting?
That was not the intent, at least not for the first day. No, haven't discussed that or decided that. But for the first day, it seems important for this group to be together with itself.
The question has been asked by members of the executive committee, how might we involve members of the public in the second day?
Yep.
And the city attorney, one of them, Judy Prosper, was going to follow up to see how that might be accomplished. And he also asked her to look at other public bodies, like the Portsmouth School Board, who have successfully held retreats with members of the public in attendance.
So that's still a question mark. Okay.
I understand that we were going to have one public and one closed.
I don't think that was not the final decision. I don't think that second day has been finalized. Okay.
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
Second.
This meeting is adjourned.